Good morning and welcome everybody, and welcome to India Association of Minnesota's SARI committee session on building our collective power as Asian Americans. We would like to start by acknowledging that we are on the indigenous land. We would like to acknowledge with deep gratitude and humility that we now stand on the land that was the homeland of the Dakota Ojibwe people in Minnesota. As you all know, May is celebrated as Asian American Heritage Month. And to mark the occasion, we are going to explore today who we are as Asian Americans, how we got here, and why is it important to learn about the past influences. Before we do that, I would like to start with a brief introduction about IAM. India Association of Minnesota is a 50-year-old nonprofit organization. We will be celebrating our 50th year next year in 2023. It has a three-pronged mission of culture, charity, and connections. IAM aims to build a strong and cohesive community of over 50,000 strong Asian Indians in the state of Minnesota. IAM seeks to build bridges of understanding between the Asian Indians and the society at large, within the state and the country, connect Minnesota with India through events that promote cultural understanding and heritage, and provide a charitable hand to causes both here as well as in India, all the while functioning as an umbrella organization to the multitude of regional organizations in the state of Minnesota. After the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020, IAM, along with a group of regional South Asian organizations, came together to show solidarity and support for the African American community in Minnesota. And that's when SARI, which stands for South Asians Against Racial Injustice, came into existence. I can't believe this week on May 26th, we will mark the second anniversary of the murder of George Floyd right here in Minneapolis. 2 years ago, in summer of 2020, SARI, within a week after George Floyd's death, organized a silent vigil in honor of George Floyd, which expressed solidarity with the African American community and pledged to engage and invest in breaking the cycle of racial prejudice and bias. As a part of SARI, we have organized a number of speaker events around educating our community about anti-Blackness that runs in our Asian American psyche. This year, the goal of SARI is to continue community education about racial justice issues and practice allyship and pave the way for ongoing collaboration with community organizations. Today's session is also under this umbrella. As we know, we are holding this session in the shadow of yet another racially charged hateful crime that happened last Sunday in Buffalo, New York, where an 18-year-old white supremacist young man opened fire and killed 10 Black individuals and injured several others. We at SARI are profoundly saddened to hear of this racist attack and stand in solidarity with the Black community. This makes it even more important to have this conversation where we talk about why is it important to learn about our own racial history in this country. Without further ado, let's start today's session. And we have with us a wonderful panel of speakers. Let me introduce today's panel. We have with us Dr. Rose Chu. Welcome, Rose. Dr. Rose has dedicated her professional life to the tireless pursuit of education, equity, and excellence for children and youth. She's the founder and president of Plum Blossom Strategy. She's an experienced educator and consultant with a diverse professional portfolio centered on equity, inclusion, and diversity, and on advancing systems change. She's a first-generation immigrant from Hong Kong and a first-generation college graduate. She has a background in industrial engineering, and she has also been a classroom teacher and has done a lot of work in the area of education. She's a professor emerita and former interim dean at the School of Urban Education, Metropolitan State University. And she has also served as assistant commissioner at Minnesota Department of Education. Dr. Chu is a founding board member of CAL, Coalition of Asian American Leaders in Minnesota. And since 2020, she is on the school board of Roseville Area Schools. And just recently, we came to know that Dr. Rose Chu is one of the 2022 Bush Fellows. So congratulations on that. And thank you so much for being here, Rose. Next, we have with us Sumi Mukherjee. He's an author and speaker who was born in Calgary, Canada, and grew up here in Minneapolis. Sumi Mukherjee published his first book titled A Life Interrupted, the story of my battle with bullying and obsessive compulsive disorder in 2011. Since then, he has written books about prevention of child abuse and prevention of workplace bullying. His latest book titled Minority Viewpoint, My Experience as a Person of Color with American Justice System was published in December 2020. Since 2011, Sumi has been speaking to hundreds of people around the country, as well as in Canada, at numerous professional conferences so that others can benefit from his stories. His books and presentations are focused on social justice issues, such as racial equality and long-term impact of bullying. Welcome, Sumi, and thank you for being here. We also have with us Karen Larson. Karen is a comedian, writer, and on-air radio personality. She's a Korean adoptee born in Seoul, trafficked as an infant and raised by a white supremacist family in a suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Karen currently resides in St. Paul. Karen is the producer and host of Living Loud, airing Thursdays on WFNU 94.1 FM. That's the Frogtown Community Radio. And she has a number of podcast shows as well. So Karen is boots on the ground organizer, activist, and community leader who believes that holding public officials accountable is an act of care. Karen was named recently to serve on the Chief of Police Examining Committee for St. Paul. Thank you so much, Karen, for being here, and welcome, welcome, welcome. Karen, you want to go first? Yeah.
Oh, hi. Okay. What am I supposed to say? Oh, what it means to be Asian American.
Yeah, so if each one of you can take some time and talk to us about what does it mean to be Asian American in 2022?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I feel like I can only speak from my perspective, and I'm a Korean adoptee. I came here as an infant. I was 5.5 months old. And so stripped of my culture, adopted into a very racist white family. The sole purpose, my father wanted me, my adoptive father wanted me because he wanted me to be his slave and concubine, basically. So that's pretty much how I grew up. My mother never wanted me. She told me that when I turned 18 after I graduated from high school, was going off to college. She admitted she never could love me, and she never wanted me. So there's that. But for me, like, growing up, my identity was obviously major confusion, right? Like, am I Asian enough, right? Because it's like, are you Asian or are you American? That was the constant thread in all the white spaces that I grew up in. And even as an adult, right? It's still like that, because it was like, you're not like them, meaning immigrants, because you're assimilated, you're like a white person, right? Even though we still experience all the same racism, being called racial slurs, being fetishized, especially by white men. All of that stuff still happens to us, even if we aren't culturally aware yet. And for me, I wanted to learn, but my parents refused to let me learn. So I'm relatively new to being Asian and proud. Like I would say, let's see, I think it was 6 years ago, I went back to the motherland of Korea, and for 10 days, and it was like a spiritual awakening. I've learned so much about my culture, that most of the things I was told growing up were lies that they tell a lot of adoptees, that I don't need to be grateful. I don't owe them anything. And yeah, so really coming into being a proud and like loving myself as an Asian woman and embracing that is not a bad thing. That's been huge for me. The model minority myth, obviously, like, I mean, that was heavy for me growing up. I was born in the 70s, so it was definitely, and I think that was the mindset of America back then, was like, well, if we're gonna have these Korean adoptees or Asians come over, we got to make them assimilate. We got to, because that's the only way they're going to be successful. And so the thing about the model minority myth is it isn't even really about Asians. It's about anti-Blackness. It's about, look at these model minorities compared to these criminal Black people, right? And so we were just pawns. It wasn't ever about us, and there is no such thing, because when push comes to shove, we don't benefit. They benefit. White supremacy benefits by keeping us at odds with each other. So I just want you to know that that's BS. If you're doing that, if you're trying to play that role now, stop. Please, like, start to work on yourself so you can heal. I would say, in light of the recent events, Floyd, the recent domestic terrorist attack, I mean, and all the other police shootings that have happened, it's like I show up to as many protests and rallies as I can. There's very few of us Asians. There needs to be more, because I constantly hear, and I've said it too, we need to start showing up for our Black siblings. That's one of the biggest criticisms. And I know we're taught, yeah, we're different from you. Oh, we have trauma too. It's not the same. We're not being hunted by police. Let's just be honest. We're not going to get, shot for just being Asian. I mean, yes, we are experiencing an uptick of violence because of the pandemic, but again, we have to keep in mind that this is white supremacy. This is what they want. You can't be blaming Black people for that. It's not. So if we buy into that narrative, like, oh, the person who attacked that elderly Asian was a Black person, it's like, nope, you're doing it wrong. You know what I mean? This is the system. This is what the system was designed to do. Keep us at odds with each other. We need to stop. We need to put ourselves in check with our own anti-Blackness. And everyone has it. Even Black people who grew up here have it. You can't not have it if you live in America and you grew up here. So yeah, I guess in 2022, I'm disappointed in my fellow Asians for not showing up. We need to be loud. We need to get crazy and get angry. we need to show up. Because otherwise we're just part of the problem. So did that answer that question?
Yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing your own personal story and your thoughts on that. Dr. Rose Chu, would you like to go next? You are muted.
Yeah, wow. Thank you, Karen, for sharing that. Really powerful. I've been in the US for over 40 years, more than 30 of them in Minnesota. And long story short is that when I changed career from being an engineer with Honeywell to an educator, it was a life mission for me to really work on the injustice that I was observing as a volunteer. And so I look at it from my perspective of how do we make sure that the education system and teachers, especially teachers and educators, actually provide the conditions for our young people to thrive, especially our students of color. And so for me, that stand has been the stand that I take for the over 30 something years. Because there are many causes that we can be part of. And so when I was part of the urban education in Metro State, it was almost part of my own schooling to also understand deeply around the inequity in various communities of color, especially the African-American communities of color. And I would say also the Native American community too, which is often also not talked about because oftentimes data, their numbers are so small that we don't talk about that, right? So and Karen is right. The system, right? The system itself. And when you say system, it's also made up of people. But the various systems of policies and practices and procedures historically has really intentionally pitted one group against another, have intentionally disparaged one group over another, especially if you think about Asian American. I think about what it means today is that we are over 40 ethnic groups, and to think of us as a monolithic is inaccurate. And yet we need to think about what does it mean to unite our voice. So it's a both and issue. On one hand, we need to understand each other better, even within our own community, because we can't just say, well, we're Asian. Well, it depends. We have different religion, different background, different way that we came to a US, right? Like I have an accent. And one of the pain that I carry sometimes, you talk about healing, right? That I have to acknowledge that I could be here for another 40 years and I might still be considered a foreigner, right? Not only because of the way I look, I'm not American enough, but also because of the accent that I carry. And the other thing that is interesting too is that sometimes when you think about Chinese American, in recent days, Chinese Americans also is considered like this group, even though even within Chinese, you have Chinese from Taiwan, you have Chinese from mainland, you have Chinese from Hong Kong, you have Chinese all over the world that have different experiences. And the Chinese who were born here, or Chinese who came when they were very young, Chinese who have been here for generations that built the railroad, right? They suffered lynching. Okay, Chinese actually suffered lynching. Okay, back in the 1800s, I think there were like 19 people who were lynched, and most people don't know this. Okay, so for me, being Chinese today, being Asian American today, is in a lot of ways I'm not surprised at some of the things that are happening because it didn't happen overnight. It's just that because of news and social media, it is a lot more highlighted and spotlighted. In a lot of ways, it's a good thing. But it's also behooves us to realize that this didn't happen overnight. Some of these things have been happening. And what does it mean for all of us to actually understand our own history in relationship to what is happening today, right? Like what Karen said, the anti-Blackness, if you don't look at the history better, it will look like, wow, if only they do this, only if, like we are pitting ourselves against each other versus really deeply understanding that our experiences might be different, but we also need to unite as what now we call BIPOC communities in order to fight against the system that hasn't always been set up for us to succeed. And so when we succeed, to say that, oh, I succeeded because I didn't need any help, is to disparage that not every one of us experienced that. how do we really work with each other and understand each other's experiences in a way that deepen our solidarity, and know that there is historically and currently those things that we need to fight against. So for me, it's been very sad, and I didn't realize how traumatic it was when we think about the China virus, right? When we hear Chinese nowadays is associated with the Chinese government. And so we oftentimes enmesh all those terms together. And so it feels like, but I'm not from mainland. I didn't grow up there. And I love my own culture. I want to embrace my own culture and the American culture, and those can happen at the same time. That doesn't mean I'm agreeing with the government, right? Those nuances sometimes get lost in those sound bites that we hear in the media. And so sometimes I find myself having to defend myself. And I stop and say, wait, why am I defending myself? I should be able to stand up and be able to know that I'm proud of my heritage and proud to be an American citizen, all at the same time, and proud to be fighting for what is not right, right? All those things can happen at the same time. I'm so grateful for what this country has done for me, and I'm fighting for what is not right, right? Those things can happen at the same time. So I have a lot of thoughts about this from an education standpoint. So I do a lot of work with educators to really have them think about what does it mean to teach students who don't look like you, who don't have background that are similar to you. What does it mean to see them with the humanity they bring and the asset they bring, and to really be very always in this learning mode, right? That learning mode that we sometimes have to unlearn what we thought of another culture, what we thought education should be, what we thought learning should be, what we thought behavior should be, what we thought parent engagement should be. All those things are coming from our personal perspective as teachers. And so I always talk about how, what does it mean to start interrupting that and start thinking about another way of looking at and teaching and being in community and learning from the students and families that are now different, right? The demographics are shifting. There is no going back. And what does it mean to really teach and provide the quality education that everybody deserves? Oh my goodness, you know what, Sally, we can go on forever.
We would love to hear more, but you know, we will get to some of that. But thank you so much. I know you have such immense knowledge in this area. Sumi, we would love to hear from you. Sumi Mukherjee.
Okay, everybody can hear me okay? Okay, so the question was what it means to be Asian American in 2022. That's what the question was for this, right? And I would say that it means the same thing to me that it's meant my whole life. It means living here in Minnesota in the United States with a white majority. It means being an underdog. It means being at a disadvantage constantly, and that disadvantage is sometimes very visible and sometimes it's kind of on the back burner a little bit, and you might even forget that it's there, but then soon enough something happens to remind you that it's there. So when I think of the fact that I'm an Asian American, the first thing I think is that I am perceived when I say perceived, I mean by the majority, which are white people. I'm perceived as being different. And being different, as I've given many speeches all over the country to kids and other groups and stuff, that being different should be a good thing and we should celebrate our differences. We're not quite there yet. As you could see from recent events in Buffalo and stuff. I mean, those are the most extreme examples, but there's examples every day in all of our lives of how people don't accept the difference. And I think that you know, somebody I recently met had made the comment that, you know, so much of America is still deeply rooted in white supremacist beliefs. And I think that's really true, because these differences are not accepted. And I encountered that for the first time, and it was very, my experience has always been, it's sort of like, it's a twofold thing. Like I think Dr. Chu was saying, and both of you said a lot of stuff that I agree with, of course. That's the advantage of going last, right? You can just kind of say that what she said and what she said. But that's basically, I mean, what both of you said is really true here. And I think that for me, it was that my parents grew up in a third world country, in a very poor country, and they were, speaking of being different, my parents were very different. They were both very well educated. They both got out of India, where they both grew up. They were also different in that they did not necessarily conform to all the Indian beliefs. Like, they did not have an arranged marriage. They didn't meet each other till they met in Canada. So they didn't even meet in India. They met in Canada, and they got married and everything. And I was born in Calgary, and then they had the dream that, you know, hey, look, you know, we have, well, it's interesting because, and I wonder about this all the time, because my dad had the idea once I was born and once they got married that they would go back home. And the question was, well, where was home at that point, you know? And Dad wanted to go back to India and raise me and my younger brother, who would come along 4 years later, raise us in India, where my mom and dad had both grown up. My mom really wanted to do something different, to raise us in America, where she believed correctly that we would have a lot of opportunities and privileges and things that we would not have had growing up in India, in a third world country, where there were a lot of difficulties that you know, people in America are privileged and lucky not to have. And they really envisioned this much, much, much better world and much better life for their children. And I've talked to them about this so much over the years. They were half right. I mean, I think a lot of things in my life are significantly better for me because I'm living in the United States of America and I've grown up here, and I have opportunities and privileges and stuff that I think people in a country like India, some of them can't even dream of having these opportunities and privileges, and we forget that. The flip side is, to this day of the year 2022 and the age of 46, I have never been fully accepted by the white community. It started in school. It took the place of bullying, bias-based bullying, due to the fact that I was different. I was told very clearly, it's the color of your skin. All kinds of different theories about where I was from. Dr. Chu touched on the fact that you're still thought of as a foreigner, no matter how many years you live here. And it wasn't just the kids, you know, it was teachers too. Teachers would take attendance and read my name, and, you know, my name was different and no one could pronounce it. And so often, every different grade level, kids would, or not even kids, I'm sorry, teachers would, when they took attendance, teachers would ask, so are you new to the country? You know, like every new grade level in the same school system. And it was generally the same group of kids. So the kids found it hilarious that this was happening to me. But every different, you know, go to a different grade or different section or different whatever, some teacher would be like, would hear the name and not be able to pronounce it. So everyone would laugh hysterically. And then the teacher would make some comment to the effect of that, are you just off the plane from Bombay? And you're brand new here. And all the kids would roar with laughter because they've known me since I was in kindergarten. But that's how I was perceived. You're always perceived as being different, as being foreign, as someone that, and and there was different groups too. Like there was 3 different main groups of mentality I would encounter, and still to this day that I encounter. There was a small group, and I'm talking about white people now, because I tried somewhat to connect with Indian community, but growing up, there really wasn't much of one where I was going to school. It was just basically, there was there diversity at my high school? Yes, me. I was the diversity. I think that's changed a bit, but in my day, it was not the case. So I think there was a small group of people that accepted me immediately without reservations. And they saw me as a person, and that was it. And there were too few of those. There were also those that are truly just absolute haters. I mean, they don't even want to look at you. They won't speak to you. You know, you are a person of color. You're not white. And it's very in your face. And, you know, they're just, and that's also a smaller group that are truly the haters. The majority, the larger majority, the much, much larger group was in between. And what I found to this day, and it's remarkable, to this very day, I have to prove myself. I don't start with white people, most white people, on an equal playing field. I'm below them. This is how they see it. This is not how I see it. This is how they see it. And this is how they convey to me that it's almost like you're somebody to be watched. We don't know what you're really like. We don't know if we can trust you. You're different, we think, in some way. So you're kind of on friendship or / good person probation, and we're going to kind of get to know you, but we've got reservations, and it's because of the color of your skin and how you look. And then a lot of these people, I mean, it's strange to say this, but a lot of these people ended up becoming people I dated, people that I became friends with, even some became and sometimes it wasn't the people themselves, it was their parents or their family members or their friends or people they knew. And then I would get to know people, and then they would tell me that I would say, oh, I've experienced stuff growing up in Minnesota. And then they would say, oh yeah, by the way, my so-and-so thought this of you when I first met you. And I'd be like, what? My friends thought you were a bin Laden supporter and that you would be mad that the United States killed Osama bin Laden. You'd be furious about it. And I'm like, I hate that guy just as much as anybody else, you know? And it's not because of his color, it's because of what the actions, you know? So that stayed with me. And so there was primarily those 3 groups. And it was so interesting. The main group where people would come to me, people I dated would come to me and tell me, we would end up having a successful courtship, and they would later on say, you know, I didn't like you at first because of your race and your color. And this would be after we became very close, when they could feel comfortable enough to say that, and they could say it because now they felt 180 degrees different. So they felt comfortable enough with me that they could tell me that this is how I first felt, you know? I write in Minority Viewpoint, my latest book that's published, the daughter of a lady I dated, where this doesn't usually happen when you date somebody, but I dated this lady, and she happened to be white, like most of the people around me are, and in Minnesota. And we dated for several months, and we broke up. And, you know, I've had a lot of breakups, but in this particular case, for some reason, I stayed really close to all of her family and stuff. And that's remained the case even 10 years after the fact now. And she has a daughter who's at the time was really young and now is almost 21 years old. But I got to know that when I was dating this lady at first, the daughter really just hated me, you know, and she just didn't like me. And she just went out of her way to treat me badly for several months and stuff. And it was really an unpleasant experience, and part of it, and part of the reason was that you know, she was really attached to the guy that was with her mom before I came along, so that makes sense. But you know, she really didn't like me, and then eventually I had some family friends that were some boys the same age as my ex's daughter, and I kept in touch with my ex's kids after my ex and I broke up, and I primarily because I stayed in touch with the grandma. That's another story. I fell in love with the grandma's little dog, and he's still my dog to this day. And so I stayed in touch with my ex's mom and my ex's sister because I fell in love with both of their dogs, and I watch both their dogs to this day. So that's kind of a sweet little story. But this young lady, you know, I introduced her to some friends. Some friends of mine had some boys her age, and I introduced them to those boys, and she really got along with those boys. And then whenever she'd come to see her grandma who lived in the Twin Cities, she'd bring her one of her friends, and then they'd meet these boys and stuff. And after that, this daughter of the lady I dated really started to like me. Primarily because she really was crushing on one of the three boys that I introduced her to. Let's be honest, what motivates a teenager, right? So I've had many of these moments though, where, like I said, people that are friends to me or became friends to me or became, you know, girlfriends to me or something would have that moment where they'd later tell me that either they themselves or others in their lives thought very negative of me before they got to know me because of my race, my color, my ethnicity. And this was probably one of the most eye-opening ones that I ever had. Was one day, years later, we were sitting at Applebee's, and I was with these boys and their parents, and my ex's daughter was there. And this is after now she really, really likes me, and I'm like a mentor to her, and we're very, very close. She tells me all her personal stuff and it gets my advice on stuff. And we were super, super close. And we were laughing because she was laughing about how somebody brought it up that, oh, when Sumi dated your mom, you really didn't like Sumi, did you? And she was laughing and saying, no, I hated him, and I was so mean to him. And we would laugh. We were laughing about it and stuff, you know, because we could look back and laugh at it now because now we're so close. And then somebody asked, I didn't ask, somebody else at the table asked, why didn't you like Sumi? Why did you hate him so much? We liked him right away, you know? And then she said that primarily it was because he was brown. And I said, when she first said that, I said, you're joking, right? Because I had no idea. This is years after knowing her for like 5-6 years, and we're very close now. And she tells me things she doesn't tell her own mom and dad. And this is the first time hearing this. And she said, it was because of, you know, because you replaced Mark, the guy before you, and you kind of embarrassed me the first time I met you at the Science Museum. And there's a couple other reasons. Then she said, but another reason was because you were brown and you were Indian. And I said, are you serious? Are you joking? Or is that, I really couldn't believe it. As naive as that sounds as an adult, I just couldn't believe that. And she said, no, I absolutely felt that. I felt that you're brown and you're Indian, and my mom could do better. Why is my mom with this guy? And then I said, I still couldn't believe it. So I still said like a third or fourth time, are you serious? You're not just joking around. You actually were like, had these feelings towards me. She said, yeah, that's really why I hated you. And she said, she said, oh, don't worry. It wasn't just me. My classmate that saw you at the Science Museum also looked at me and said, why is your mom with that Indian guy? That and the story that the shocking story I detail in my book, Minority Viewpoint, and then an even more shocking story of racism right in my own neighborhood in Plymouth, Minnesota, that's been affecting my life for the last 4 years. To this day in 2022, I guess my answer is, again, to what it means to be an Asian American, it means you're an outsider. To the majority, to the white majority. This is all in reference to the white majority, not to each other. You're an outsider. You're an underdog. Your life might be okay, but you got to keep your guard up, because you're going to be targeted in weird ways you may not even think of, but are going to happen just to you because you're a person of color and you're surrounded by white people. And that is a disadvantage that every advantage that my parents gave me to growing up in America and Minnesota, that disadvantage has never gone away. And what makes me upset too is that I think all people of color, you know, it's good to do things with your own culture and stuff, but I think all people of color, whether we're Black, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, Somali, Middle Easterners, any other group of people of darker skin color that any of you can name, we can't always just do this as our own little group. We all have to come together and say, this whole thing, like both of the prior speakers said, is white supremacy and white supremacist beliefs. They are pitting us all against each other and sitting and watching as we dance around like puppets for them. That has to stop. We all need to come together and say, whatever our specific race, we are people of color, and we need to make this country equal for all of us. And that's all we're asking for. We're not asking for more than anybody else. We're asking for equal treatment and not to be disparaged, not to be killed, not to be robbed, not to be put down. And again, those are extreme examples like Buffalo and George Floyd, but these things are happening every day, just to different degrees. And so I think that's, to me, it means to be an Asian American means to be an underdog, have your guard up, and know that sadly, and it shouldn't be this way, but it's their world and we just live in it. And we need to change that. And the only way we can change that is we all have to come together and change it.
Wow.
And if something happens to Black people, it should outrage all of us. If it happens to Indian people, it should outrage all of us. If it happens to Korean people, it should outrage all of us. It shouldn't just be that, oh, well, I'm not Black, so I don't have to worry about that, or I'm not Korean, I'm just going to worry. It should be all of us together saying, enough is enough. America needs to truly be what my parents envisioned when they decided to bring us up here. And I don't know what life I would have had growing up in India, but that's always been a question in my mind. So I guess that's what it means to me today to be an Asian American.
Yeah, Sumi, that was really powerful. And the description you gave us of your childhood and growing up years is Plymouth, Minnesota. And the Indian community, the Asian community that we're talking about, today, if you go to see all these suburbs, especially Plymouth, is full of Indians or full of Asians. And if you go to the schools there now, you will see a lot of kids who look like you. And you said when you were growing up, you were the only kid, one of the minorities there. So it's really unbelievable to even imagine that now. And I'm sure, even given the fact there are so many kids who look like that, still, when it comes to Asian Americans, we are, as they call it, forever foreigners, right? You described in what you just said that even though kids are born here, brought up here, spend their lives here, maybe they're second, third generation kids, and still when they meet somebody for the first time before they open their mouth, they might hear the question, so where are you from, right? And they are as American as any other kid.
And Dr. Chu, I don't even have an accent and I still get that.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
It's before you open your mouth.
It's a double whammy for me. Yeah, both, you know. Yeah.
So one question, and you very beautifully pointed out that how we have to stand in solidarity with each other when it comes to this anti-racism work, because discrimination against any one community is discrimination against everybody, right? So one question that I would love to ask Dr. Chu is, and since you are in the field of education and you have been training teachers and advocating about system change, this piece, you know, we hardly learn about Asian American history in history books. Our kids who are learning history here hardly learn about that. So how can we change that? How can we change so that that invisibility goes away, or at least people become aware of Asian American history, what they've contributed to this country, or what are we now? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, now, just to be clear, there are standards in our school system that talk about Asian American history. It's just never sufficient. Oftentimes standards is what I call the floor. That means it's the minimal of what students are supposed to learn, okay? And so oftentimes we think that, well, we have to follow standards. So if it is not in the standard, we can't talk about it. But these are real lives. These are lives of our students. These are lives of our families. And I think one of the things that I'm given the time, I'm going to say something about how Some of it is that while we work on system change, right? Either changing the standards, making sure the teachers know what they're doing, principals create an environment for those conditions to be more inclusive. What can we do ourselves to learn more about our own history and also stand up, right? Like to really, because some of it is that our own mental models, and that means our own images of how our relationship is to school. Sometimes it's based on many of us, like our own way of growing up, right? Our own way of growing up, our own way of relating to school. And so if we all want to make sure that we are not invisible, that we are more visible, then the change has to start from us. That each of us has to say, you know what, I got to learn a little bit more about what is going on in school. I got to learn a little bit more about why is something the way it is. Sometimes we accept things. In general, I'm very generalizing, Asian Americans tend to be more collective in thinking than individualistic. And so sometimes we just kind of go along. We just go along. Yeah, that's the way it is. You would never question something. So what does it mean to start questioning? Right? In a nice way, right? Like just asking questions and say, so what, are you doing any books that are from Asian authors? Is the environment, any of your assembly going to be about anybody from the Asian community? Like little questions like that. Because when I was a teacher, that's what I noticed right away. I love being in solidarity with my Black colleagues and making sure that my Black students have what they need. But oftentimes, without knowing, every single of our assembly in school, there was nothing that was Asian focused, nothing in the whole year. So that's the kind of thing that if you start noticing, you realize that, wait a minute here, some of us are invisible. We talk about people of color, and people of color does not sometimes include us. We all know that, right? People of color include Hispanic, include Black, and I want that to be included. And we have to stand up to say, hey, how about Asian American? That's been my role on the school board. So when they talk about absent narratives and we want to bring in many stories about different culture, I go, are you also working on the nuance of the different stories in the Asian community? And they go, we are working on it. Good. I'm going to keep asking that question, right? I'm going to keep asking that question. And so there's a little bit of me to say that there are many of us working on the system level, and what can we do at the individual level to pay attention to some of those things and interrupt our own thinking and go, whoa, in just of saying, oh, just this the way it is. Maybe I just need to have a conversation with a teacher. I need to have a conversation with a principal. I need to study a little bit more about those historical events that is impacting the current events. So that's what I would say right now, for something very concrete for all of us.
Yeah. No, that's very important. And also, since we're talking about school and education and kids, I would love to see what Karen has to say about, this concept of racial socialization. Because Karen, you mentioned that growing up, you were an adoptee and you were sort of taken from your Korean culture and put in this totally white American culture. And you were not racially socialized in a way which helped you to deal with that identity piece. So what would you tell people when it comes to that racial socialization piece? How important is it that? Because especially Asian families don't think about it, right? You also mentioned about the model minority and how that is what the expectation is put on the child, but we don't talk about those issues. Whereas in Black families, we have heard people saying as soon as our child is 2 or 3 years old, we start talking about being a Black child, right? Or being a Black person in the community. So that is missing in the Asian bringing up. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, from my perspective, so I remember kids was, in kindergarten, everyone loved each other, right? And then it's about 2nd, 3rd grade, I started getting teased a lot, and people were like, what are you? Go back on the boat, and I'd go home crying, and my mom would say, we'll tell them, what do you know? You came over on a plane. Like, oh yeah, that'll teach them, right? And every year in elementary school, we used to play this game at the very beginning of the school year, called Who's Got a Baby Face, where we all had to bring in our baby picture. And so I was the only person of color. And it kind of became a running joke of like, well, we're just gonna make you the free space in bingo, because everyone always knew it was me, right? But it's super important, especially if you're if you're a white person or an Asian person and you're adopting somebody who's not from your ethnicity, it's transracial, you need to be committed to taking some classes, educating them, giving them opportunities to go to camps. Like there were Korean culture camps. My parents would not let me go because it goes against being assimilated, right? They don't want me to. You're basically, you're identifying as American, you're not Asian, right? But then like, I'd still get the same Asian tropes and stereotypes that were negative. And even the positive ones, the ones that are positive, like we're really great and we're gifted in science and math. Well, in first grade, and I actually failed math. My parents were so pissed. They're like, we spent all this thousands of dollars on you and you suck at math, like put some effort in, right? I mean, they were like really like legit wanted to send me back. They thought I was defective. Like you got a elimination or something, right? But the reason that I failed it was because I couldn't sleep at night, because that's when my father would, you know, do things to me. So I fell asleep in class. So it wasn't because I was like, you know, it wasn't like I'm stupid or whatever. It was just, you know, those things. And for an adoptee, it's like at the time in the 70s and 80s, it's like, well, you have a much better, even when I would tell people what he was doing. Well, you should be grateful because you have a much better opportunity here than you would in Korea. They don't know that. You know what I mean? They don't know that. That's all. Yes, I think, I forgot your question. Am I answering it?
Yeah. So,
okay.
So making sure that the kids feel they get the necessary resources to feel comfortable in the identity. So,
well, because otherwise you grow up, I mean, you get mixed messages, right? From dominant society and at home. I know, like, I've did some research on like Hmong families and how like the intergenerational conflict where the younger generation wants to be more American, where the older generation is like, no, you're missing the culture part. And I think it needs to be both. The people who have both and are willing to embrace both are going to be the ones that flourish. You know, just, you need both. You can't love yourself unconditionally if you have a missing piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was like, yeah, I always felt this sense of this void, right? Like I don't belong anywhere. I don't fit in completely here. I'm not Asian enough for, you know, like I remember walking at the U of M and walking by the cultural center for the Asian Americans. And they looked at me like, what are you doing here? Like they knew I wasn't like them, right? And so that whole thing, it's all anti-Blackness, right? And I'm embarrassed to say this, but like, I didn't learn until I went to college that East Indians were considered Asian Americans. And a lot of people don't know that, you know? So yeah, that was my whitewashed upbringing. And I wanted to mention something to what Dr. Chu said. I'm all for ethnic studies in every classroom, starting in K through 5, going all the way up through end of high school, because I had to go to college to learn about my culture. There was nothing. They did an Asian American thing and it was only Chinese, Japanese, that's it. Maybe Filipino a little bit. Nothing in the whole school system or library system on Koreans or Korean adoptees. So that, talk about feeling invisible, right? We also need to, in my opinion, we need to implement critical race theory, because that is actual American history. That piece, if it's implemented throughout all classrooms, will be that will be key to like getting people to, oh, it will break down the barriers of discrimination between, you know, even within Asians, with, you know, the whatever tensions that are there, but definitely between Asians and Black families and Black culture. Because if you're able to like really look at the history, we do have a history of solidarity, of times of solidarity, and we do have conflict, but we need to understand where that conflict came from because of misunderstandings, because none of us learned our true culture or true history. Mm-hmm. We learned American history. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's huge. That's a huge part of it. And white people are pushing back on it. Well, I don't want my kids to hate ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't mean you're going to hate yourself. Wouldn't you rather learn the truth? No, they don't want us to know the truth.
Exactly.
Christopher Columbus didn't discover America. America is built on stolen land by stolen people. Christopher Columbus, I think what did he discover? Brazil or some tropical place? But they still teach all this stuff. That's, I can't believe it. It's like,
yeah,
everything I learned was a lie. How is that? I mean, that's why people hate the public school system. I'll tell you that. Because of that, because it's continuing. White supremacy is a beast. As soon as we get close to doing anything to change things, full stop. You know what I mean? Full stop. And it's all the people that are in those positions. So we need more honest politicians too, if that's even possible.
Yeah. So history is written by the dominant culture and taught by people in that dominant culture. So yeah. You're right. And these are all very important issues. I know we can go on talking. There are so many things to talk about. But we, I think, have reached the last few minutes of our hour. And I would like each one of you to say a little bit or give a message to our audience today as to few things that you would like them to take away today, whether it's about what they can do, how they can educate themselves about these issues that we've been talking about, anything that you would like to tell our audience today before we go from here.
Oh, do you want me to go first?
Anyone can go, that's fine.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you for listening and tuning in. I guess I would like to say that when we're talking about like collectively like social justice issues and things like that, which racial equity and equality, that's my focus, police accountability, like understand that there's so many problems and injustices happening throughout the world, like simultaneously, that when you start to look at, oh, what specific issue do I want to work on, it can be really overwhelming. It can be really overwhelming just to wake up as a person of color and go through your day right now, right? But the good news is that it's all interconnected. So if I'm working on a piece of police accountability, I'm pulling on that thread, right? And Dr. Chu is working on a piece in education. And Sumi is working on a piece in, I don't know, interracial dating. I don't know, I mean, whatever. Like, it's all interconnected. So that's the good news. Like, find your niche, and go with it, and know that, like, collectively, those of us who are doing the work will eventually dismantle that cloth, that hood, right? And start showing up, start using your voice, get loud. I mean, let's make good trouble. It's time. We need to also recognize our place in society, in American culture, that we are privileged. We are more privileged than Black people. We are more privileged than Mexicans, or, you know, like we are white adjacent, whether we feel it or not. We just are. So we need to use that privilege, just like I tell white people, we need to use our privilege in society to help bring up our Black brothers and sisters. We've like been silent way too long. And honestly, when I do that and I help and I advocate for them, it helps me heal. Because none of us are really free until all of us are free. So I guess I would encourage people to get involved, do something. If you can't be out there, boots on the ground, work on legislation, getting the George Floyd and Policing Act through, get the John Lewis Voting Act, get that through. You know, call your legislators, call your senators. There's the anti-hate Asian crime bill passed. That created more tension between Black and Asian because they were still waiting for lynching to become a federal crime. Well, now they're trying to pass the anti-Black hate crime bill. So help with that, you know, support Black-owned businesses. Like, that's another piece of tension, right? In communities, especially my community. There's a lot of Asian stores and restaurants, and there's barely any Black. And so there's that tension, but if they know the history of it, they go, oh, okay, so it's not personal. This is just white supremacy working its magic, right? Or, you know, not magic, but.
Yeah, casting its spell.
We don't want to
casting its spell.
Yeah, we don't want to be pawns anymore. We are not pawns. We have a voice. We, you know. So yeah, so I guess, like, let's get in some good trouble together and keep our anti-Blackness in check and start showing up, because it's really important for all of us to heal and come together. If we all do, think about it, there's more people of color in America than there are white people. If we all came together collectively, we could dismantle it. We could all decide collectively, we're not going to shop here or there, you know what I mean? We're going to take our money out of these banks and go to a Black-owned bank or, you know, person of color's bank. What would they do? What if everybody decided we're not showing up for work? The whole system would implode on itself. So I don't know. I guess I'm kind of but you know.
No, that's a great thought to leave with. Yeah.
Well, I mean, economics, right? You got to get them where it hurts, and that's the money. Money talks.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I guess I would just say thank you for everybody for tuning in and listening to this on a Saturday morning. That right away shows that at least it's being valued. And I think the summary that what Karen just finished saying is that we all truly have to come together and do something. We can't just sit back and say that, be passive about it. Too many people, way too many people are passive. And if we put that passiveness into action, this would not be allowed to continue. And I think we all just need to really think about that and very much think about coming together. Exactly what Karen just said, that we could dismantle this whole thing if all people of color came together. And it doesn't mean in a violent way. No. It just means we can say enough is enough, and we can all take action. The days of sitting in the background and waiting until it specifically happens individually to me, even though it's happening to others, you know, those days have to end. We all have to get involved.
Yeah, that's a great message. Thanks, Sumi. Rose?
Yeah, I also want to really thank you for this opportunity. Like Sally said, we could talk for another hour, hour or two, right? Because this is so deep. Really thank you for this opportunity. This is work that I've been doing and continue to do. And I would say that no matter how difficult things are, I just want to leave us with, and I agree with a lot, all of the things that's been said about what we need to do to come together and stand up and really pay attention, right? For ourselves to pay attention. But I also want us to make sure that we don't give our power away. There's a lot we can do individually and collectively, daily, every moment. And how, no matter how difficult, what does it mean to also have a hopeful stand that things can change, right? That things can change, and that that we can use our personal power and collective power to impact what is around us. And sometimes when we think of systems, we think of big system, like the whole US or the whole world. Sometimes it might be the system right in front of us. Like how I am provide, for example, as a parent, as an individual, what am I doing within my own household, within my own community, within my own neighbors, within my own school system, right? Within my own business community. So think of our own power in a way that we know we can be hopeful for the change that we want.
Wow, what a wonderful message. Thank you so much. And I would now like to call upon Suyash Jain to end this program.
Thanks, Riley. I just want to say, just wow, what a insightful and powerful conversation. And thank you to everyone here for sharing their stories and personal experiences. It's just thought-provoking, and like many of you said, let's work collectively to bring about the change. And we need to get more active. We need to raise our voices. And also we need to make sure that the history of Asian Minnesotans does not get lost. We need to bring it to the forefront and highlight that. So, and I hope there are many more discussions, and not just discussions and conversations, but we take action together and bring about the change for the better. So thank you, everyone, again.